12 years before the collapse, Thomas Cook was a profitable FTSE 250 company with 30,000 staff and an airline of more than 100 aircraft. Then, on the 23rd of September 2019, it ceased to exist. 9,000 UK workers lost their jobs overnight. 150,000 British holidaymakers were stranded abroad. The executives who had run it into the ground walked away with £20 million. A cabin crew member named Kia Dawn Hayward found out from a notification on her phone. The night before, she had posted a photograph of herself in uniform in front of a Thomas Cook aircraft. The caption said it was her dream job. By morning, the company that had given her that job no longer existed. This is how Britain's oldest travel company died. Leicester, 1841. A 32-year-old Baptist preacher named Thomas Cook organised a rail excursion from Leicester to Loughborough. 570 people went. The fare was a shilling. Cook believed working men should travel, that holidays should not be the preserve of the wealthy. By the middle of the 20th century, his company had survived 2 world wars, the Great Depression and the arrival of the jet engine. The high street shop with the orange and white sign became as much a part of British life as the corner shop and the post office. For 4 generations of working-class families, a Thomas Cook holiday meant Benidorm, Tenerife, Lanzarote. By 2007, Thomas Cook employed over 30,000 people worldwide and was, by any reasonable measure, a national institution. But that was the year the institution started to die. In June 2007, Thomas Cook merged with MyTravel, another package holiday operator. On paper, the deal made sense. In practice, MyTravel brought hundreds of millions of pounds in legacy debt onto the balance sheet, debt that Thomas Cook would spend the next 12 years trying to absorb. Within 2 years, the financial crisis hit and bookings collapsed. By 2011, the company was issuing profit warnings. The chief executive at the time, Manny Fontaine-Lenovoa, was sacked. The share price fell 90%. The company secured an emergency loan from its banks just to keep the lights on. The clock was already ticking. The men at the top simply could not hear it yet. What happened next was a textbook case of how to slowly kill a company while telling everyone it is healthy. Successive management teams refused to write down the goodwill from the MyTravel deal because doing so would have triggered banking covenants and capped their bonuses. They booked optimistic forecasts and paid themselves on the basis of those forecasts. Every year, the underlying debt grew. By the summer of 2019, it had passed £1.7 billion. Every package holiday, every hotel night, every airline seat was being priced not to make a profit, but to service the debt of a merger from 12 years earlier. That detail matters, because while this was happening, the people in charge were not taking pay cuts. They were taking bonuses. Peter Fankhauser became chief executive in November 2014. By the time the company collapsed, he had been paid £8.3 million in salary, bonuses and benefits. Analysis of the annual reports showed the senior team collectively received approximately £20 million in remuneration between 2015 and 2019. The chief financial officer, Michael Healy, took home around £8 million over his time at the company. The chairman, Frank Meisman, drew hundreds of thousands a year for his oversight. If you're wondering how that's even legal, so is everyone else. While these payments were being made, Thomas Cook was telling its banks it could not service its debt. The company was borrowing money to make payroll. It was, in the language of the city, a zombie, but the men running it were drawing salaries that put them in the top 0.1% of British earners. When the members of Parliament on the Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy Committee finally interrogated this arrangement after the collapse, they used a phrase that became the defining indictment of the entire affair. They called it rewards for failure. They demanded the executives hand the money back. The executives did not. By the summer of 2019, Thomas Cook needed £900 million in fresh financing just to make it through the winter. A rescue deal was put together with Fosun, the Chinese conglomerate that already owned 18% of the business. Fosun would inject £450 million. The banks would convert their debt to equity. Existing shareholders would be wiped out. For a few weeks in August and early September, it looked as though the deal might hold. Bookings continued. Cabin crew were rostered for flights into October. Holidaymakers paid in good faith for trips they would never take. Pay attention to this next detail because it explains everything. In the third week of September, the banks demanded an additional £200 million in standby capital. Fosun would not provide it. The Department for Transport was approached. Ministers refused. The reason given was moral hazard. The British government would not commit £150 million of taxpayer money to keep a private company alive. But within the same week, the Civil Aviation Authority was asked to spend approximately £100 million repatriating the holidaymakers Thomas Cook had stranded. The taxpayer paid either way. The only question was whether the money would save 9,000 jobs or whether it would simply be used to clean up the wreckage. The government chose the wreckage. If you are following this story, hit subscribe. Redundant Britain covers the corporate collapses and institutional betrayals that the official inquiries forget. New investigations every week. By dawn on the 23rd of September, every Thomas Cook flight in the world had been cancelled and 45 chartered aircraft from rival airlines had been mobilised to bring British tourists home. Keir Dawn Hayward and her colleagues found out the same way the rest of the country found out, from the news on a phone or the radio in a kitchen. Some staff turned up to work and discovered the doors locked. Others, on layovers in Greece or Spain, were told by hotel receptionists that the airline had collapsed and they would need to find their own way home. The legal consequences were brutal. Because Thomas Cook had gone into compulsory liquidation rather than administration, the workers were not entitled to standard redundancy procedures from their employer because their employer no longer legally existed. They lost accrued holiday pay, notice pay, and the wages they were owed for the final pay period. Those would have to be claimed from the government's National Insurance Fund, capped at a statutory maximum that for many longer-serving staff did not cover what they were owed. The pension scheme had been carrying a deficit for years. Workers who had paid in for 30 years discovered through letters in the post that their retirement income had been reduced by 10% or more through no fault of their own. People who had budgeted their later years around a Thomas Cook pension found themselves recalculating in the autumn of 2019 what kind of retirement they could now afford. The version of the story you have probably heard is the version about the holidaymakers. By the 6th of October, the Civil Aviation Authority had brought everyone back. The honeymoon couples got their photographs, the families got their suntans, the press coverage ended, but the workers' story did not end with it. Fankhauser, appearing before the Parliamentary Committee in October 2019, refused to return any of his pay. He said the collapse was the result of circumstances beyond management's control, citing Brexit, the heat wave of 2018, and fuel costs. He apologised. He kept the $8.3 million. The committee chair, Rachel Reeves, told him his apologies rang rather hollow when he was unwilling to put anything back. She suggested his 2017 bonus could be used instead to pay redundancy. Fankhauser said he would reflect. He did not return the money. That was only round one. The Insolvency Service opened an inquiry into the conduct of Thomas Cook's directors. In January 2022, after a 2-year investigation, it announced it would take no action against any of them. No director was disqualified. No executive was ordered to repay any portion of their compensation. The auditors, EY, were investigated separately by the Financial Reporting Council for failures in their audits of the 2017 and 2018 accounts. EY paid a financial settlement. No individual auditor was held personally accountable. That is the kind of outcome that makes lawyers cry. Hayes Travel, a smaller British operator based in Sunderland, bought the lease on most of the high street units within weeks of the collapse and hired around 2,500 of the former Thomas Cook staff. It was a remarkable gesture from a privately owned company, but it was also less than a third of the workforce Thomas Cook had abandoned. The remaining 6,500 were on their own. In 2020, Peter Fankhauser took up a new directorship in the German tourism sector. The 8.3 million remained in his bank account. By his own evidence to members of parliament, he believed he had done nothing wrong. The system, in the end, agreed with him. Compare that to what the workers got: a statutory redundancy capped at a few £1,000s, a reduced pension, a line on a CV that needed explaining at every job interview for the next 5 years. The phone call to a mortgage lender to explain that the household income had just collapsed. The conversation with a child about why this year's holiday was no longer happening. And a memory, for some of them, of finding out from a notification on a phone that the company they had given their working lives to no longer existed. Peter Fankhauser walked away with £8.3 million. The 9,000 workers walked away with a P45. Thomas Cook's first ever excursion in 1841 was sold on a simple promise: that ordinary working people deserved the chance to travel. 178 years later, the company that grew out of that promise was wound up overnight. If this is the kind of investigation you want to see more of, the next one is on screen now. Subscribe to Redundant Britain. Thank you.